We are going to discuss today some propaganda that was found on the DEA website that demonstrates their absolute fear of cannabis. And legally, there are ways to fight back against this nonsense from our federal government. We're going to show you two bits of propaganda, both on the website. These are the titles of the pamphlets, The Danger and Consequences of Marijuana Abuse and Drugs of Abuse. And what we're going to see is that this new law, Information Quality Act, does allow people to spot this sort of nonsense and take action to try to do something about it. This was initiated in December of 2016, so it's fairly recent. And generally, it's saying that the DEA continues to give out certain information, which is contradicted by other information the DEA has put out. And this group wants that information removed from the website. And in fact, at this point, it has been removed from the website. Basically, the group that's bringing this is the Medical Cannabis Patients and Caregivers group, and they represent people who need medical cannabis but are not able to get access or have limited access. And the gist of the complaint here is that there is a substantial risk that Congress is going to make bad decisions based on the bad information that they are being fed by the DEA. I suppose this presupposes that the Congress persons would be relying on the DEA in the first place. I'm not quite sure why anybody would want to rely on the DEA, but at least they would use the DEA as cover for whatever policies they are enacting. And the law that's being discussed here basically says, let's leave this whole marijuana thing to the states. The DEA has published scientifically inaccurate information, as we just said, and this act here is the CARERS Act. And as you can see here, essentially what it says is that the Controlled Substances Act, which has put marijuana in the same category as heroin, will not apply to people who are in compliance with state law when they are dealing with marijuana or cannabis in some way. Essentially, if it's okay with the states, the feds are okay, and they're going to have very limited ability to do any prosecution. The fear here is that the senators have commented unfavorably on this bill, and they have cited DEA information upon the alleged dangers of cannabis. And they're voting based on this information. Therefore, it's very much a bad idea for this information to even be available for people to discuss, because it is not accurate, as we're going to see. The Information Quality Act requires that information from federal agencies have a certain quality, objectivity, utility, and integrity. That where there is scientific information provided, which is the case here, that it will be reproducible and accurate, and that sound scientific methods are being used when people are talking about research or scientific results from studies that they've done or things that would pertain to those scientific type of investigations. In here, we see this, the agencies, the guidelines, quality, objectivity, utility, and integrity. And as we said, the influential scientific or statistical information must be reproducible and accurate. And as we said, the DEA statements about cannabis are not accurate, and they're going to give a little bit of detail here. Again, they say that this information is scientifically inaccurate, and they want the DEA to replace certain information that is on their website, specifically these two publications that we've discussed. And they're focusing here on cannabis' alleged capacity to induce psychosis. And as we're going to see here, there simply is no scientific evidence to support this. For people who have developed psychosis while using cannabis, they were already predisposed to develop that condition. And therefore, to suggest that cannabis causes it is not scientifically objective and useful. And these are some specific examples of the propaganda from the DEA website dealing with psychosis and suicide. The suggestion is that it causes marijuana, paranoid behavior, aggressiveness, and outright psychosis. The suggestion further is that marijuana can worsen depression and even lead to schizophrenia and suicide. That is quite a claim to make. Again, they go on to allege that it can cause psychosis and schizophrenia, which is a terrible condition. And these people believe that the cannabis can actually cause that. Further, there's propaganda on the website about lung cancer and lung damage being caused by cannabis. The science on the matter is that long-term cannabis use does contribute to a chronic cough, an increase in sputum production, and more bronchitis and pharyngitis, which is what you might expect from just inhaling smoke in general. And of course, it probably is irritating to the lungs. And so it is legitimate to point that out as a danger of inhaling cannabis smoke. However, there is no data out there to show that it's a causative factor in tumors of the head and neck and lung. That information is simply not out there. Tobacco causes those problems, but marijuana, cannabis, there's just no evidence really showing that. Doing lung damage, again, there is no evidence to really suggest that. And they're basically trying to draw an analogy between tobacco and marijuana. And they're saying, well, we all know tobacco is bad and marijuana is just like that. So therefore, we definitely cannot allow people to have it. They also go on to discuss this gateway drug hoax. It's, as we're going to see here, there really is no reason to believe that marijuana is a gateway drug to use, to lead people to use other drugs. They discuss here a little bit more that once you control, take into account that people that are getting lung cancer are also smoking tobacco, the suggestion that marijuana contributes to that condition is that the evidence for that is quite weak. And they do cite a study here that found no positive correlation between marijuana and lung cancer. And there was a study done here showing 7 years of people smoking one joint a day did not adversely affect pulmonary function, even though it might have caused some irritation to the lungs and so forth. Simply put, there's no correlation between cannabis and lung cancer. And for the DEA to suggest otherwise is simply not scientifically accurate. If they can find some studies that demonstrate that, then that's fine. We will take a look at those at that point. Now we move on to the gateway theory. This so-called gateway theory that marijuana sort of opens the door for people to use other drugs, other chemicals, is simply not supported by the research. And there's therefore no basis for them to include that on their website and their propaganda that they're putting out as objective and useful. It's simply not useful to even continue to discuss this based on the science that we have at this moment. These are some other wrong statements from the DEA, that marijuana creates dependency and treatment issues. It opens the door to other drugs. This is simply not accurate. It makes them more vulnerable to heroin addiction later in life. There's just no reason to really believe that. And again, that it's a frequent precursor to use of more dangerous drugs. We won't go into detail about this today, but the real gateway drugs in this country are alcohol and tobacco. Those do seem to be associated with other drug use later on in life, but marijuana not so much. So the DEA has been caught putting propaganda on their website, and we can do something about it. This law is in effect. If you see the DEA putting out propaganda, definitely let somebody know about it. And there are measures that can be taken.